joining us now on why states need to pay more than 70,000 naira as minimum wage is Adewale Smatt-Oyerinde, is the DG Nigeria Employers Consultative Association, otherwise referred to as NECA. Thank you very much. Good to have you on Newsnight tonight.
Thank you.
I mean, it's curious. Your call is coming at a time when, just like we read in that intro, that governors are even going beyond the 70,000 naira minimum wage.
Yeah,
Imo State has gone as high as 104. You may not say it's high. Yeah. 90,000 in the case of Ebonyi State. Why is it necessary to make this call again now?
Thank you once again, and from our economic perspective and also enlightened self-interest, if you look at wage as amount paid for work done, or you look at wage as compensation for productivity, or you look at wage as an economic stimulus, then your perspective on how you approach the payment will change. If you see it as payment for work done, then you pay as much as you want to pay. But if you look at it within the context of an economic stimulus, that for every kobo that an average worker earns or one worker earns, it's not going to eat the naira. It's going to buy food so that the woman that is selling food can probably pay house rent. The owner of the house can probably send his child to school. So for every quantum of wage, it stimulates economic growth. So if you look at it from that perspective, then it becomes very important for us to treat wage as it is, as an economic stimulus. Then the conversation about how much do I pay, how much shouldn't I pay, wouldn't really arise, because we know that paying higher or paying reasonably well feeds into the economy and becomes a long-term plan for us. Now, the second part of it is looking at wage as, or looking at labor as a commodity, as the ILO said, that we shouldn't look at wage as a commodity, we shouldn't look at workers as a commodity. And we affirm that position that, look, employees, they are not commodity. They are value-adding elements in the focus of production. And part of the conversation over time, if you look at the last three discussions about the minimum wage, one of the key issues was the inability of the subnationals to pay.
Right.
Even last year, we got to a point during the committee meeting where the federal government insisted, look, we are going ahead with I think 65,000 with the organized private sector, while the state still had issues with, look, we can't do 65. Then the president approved 70, and progressively the inflow from federation account also increased. So the argument of inability to pay doesn't really suffice again, notwithstanding the socio-economic challenges that those states probably will have. But the fact remains that if you look at the worker, or the civil service, talking of the public sector now as the engine of growth of the state, then you treat your perception will be different, just like it is in the private sector.
Interesting perspective. But, there was a report done on this recently, and a state like Taraba, for instance, the head of service there says they're already struggling with the current 70,000 naira because they, as a government, had to implement two different minimum wage in the space of 1 year, 2024. They did 30,000, and then they now did 70,000, and now they don't want to be put under peer pressure of states increasing this pace. But my question to you then is that, do you see the country heading towards a two-speed dial in a situation where the welfare of workers depends entirely on where they live? And if that's the case, then is it time to accept that wages should be negotiated on state basis? But you also have to remember that Labour has consistently opposed that negotiation deal.
Let's start from the whole concept of minimum wage. Because decentralizing the minimum wage, the national minimum wage, creates a different dynamics. It opens up the opportunity for exploitation, really. So the concept of the national minimum wage is the minimum.
The barest minimum.
The barest minimum. Having taken into consideration economic factors within the context of the ILO parameters, economic factors, the needs of workers and their families, enterprise sustainability also becoming a factor, and productivity. Having taken a look at all those parameters across the country, so the minimum that an average human being should live on or should not live below becomes that 70,000 that we arrive at. So it's not the maximum. So if you decentralize the minimum, national minimum wage, we create a situation where anybody from any state can say, look, it's 20,000 we want to pay. And because you have decentralized it, you invariably create another dynamics of migration. So people will probably migrating from those states
to where they pay higher. Isn't that creating another problem?
It's creating another problem. So the cap, the national context and the global context have a national minimum below which nobody should earn, below which no citizen should live. Then states, as we have seen, can now, yes, I have the capacity to pay higher, then I can pay higher. Same way it's happening in the private sector. You know, we have specific wage policies in the private sectors. There are some businesses, organizations, they want to be in the echelon, the top echelon of which I watch wage payers to attract talents. There are some that will say, look, we want to be in the second quartile of wage payment, probably in the same industry. So you have to balance and come up with a very specific wage policy. What exactly do you want your wage policy to do for you? To attract talent, to keep workers at work, to increase productivity. You must determine that first. If you don't determine it, then you keep playing with the figure, you know, without any specific reasons behind those figures.
Like they say, if you want, okay, let me not say that. If you pay peanuts, you'll get monkeys.
You get monkeys.
Isn't that what they say?
Yeah.
Okay, now, shouldn't we begin to move away from the conversations around minimum wage, whether it's 70,000 or whatever the figures are, to really begin to talk about living wage in terms of, you know, expanding the economy to the point that it can actually be a 24-hour economy? That might apply more to the private sector. At the government level, shouldn't we be looking at, you know, living wage and, you know, expanding the economy?
The conversation about
fundamental.
The living wage conversation is quite interesting. And at the private sector, I think we are aligned with the conversation of living wage.
Right.
But the challenge with living wage is this. As we speak, there is no global parameter to define what a living wage is. Where we have living wage being implemented is basically done in some European countries where some specific organizations are towing that line, championing the cause. And I remember last year, for the first time, you know, the International Organization of Employers, that's the overall body of employers globally, where NECA belongs, the International Confederation of Trade Union, and the ILO, for the first time, there was a consensus about let's start a conversation about the parameters that is agreeable to all of us to define what a living wage is. We have that for minimum wage already. If you talk of the ones I mentioned earlier, needs of workers and their families, the economy, general economic situation, the enterprise sustainability, productivity, ability to pay. Those are parameters that have been agreed by the tripartite. But for the living wage, there's no parameter yet. But as I said, there's an agreement already by the tripartite to say, look, let's start having a conversation about the concept of living wage. But as you mentioned, pardon me, I think until we'll deal with the fundamentals, you know, and I've mentioned, now the figure can be 1 million naira for minimum wage. But if the cost of living
inflation
continue to increase, we make nonsense
of the 1 million.
Of that figure. So, as the government have started, and your report, your report a few minutes ago on the issue of health. Look, once we deal with the issue of transportation, with the new CNG buses coming up everywhere, you deal with transportation, you deal with accommodation, you deal with health issues, and then you deal with food issues. Those are basically the 4 key elements that consumes an average individual's funds. So once in the public sector, those are working, then the worker
the pressure on his money is less,
on the pressure. So we'll be talking about
exactly.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Adewale Smatt-Oyerinde, the Director General of Nigeria Employers Consultative Association, NECA. Thank you for sharing your thoughts.